much for the lovely introduction. I really appreciate that. And so, like I mentioned earlier in our gratitude, I want to talk to you folks today about the science of spiritualism. So I'm going to read to you out of our Spiritualist Manual that we have here. I recommend that everybody get a copy. It's full of fabulous information about our beautiful religion of spiritualism. So spiritualism is a science because it investigates, analyzes, and classifies facts and manifestations from the spirit side of life. So today, as I share this talk with you, many scientists quietly, and some brave souls not so quietly, continue to use scientific methods to investigate the paranormal. And in doing so, they add to an ever-growing body of psi research initiated in the late 1800s by distinguished spiritualist investigators, including chemist Sir William Crookes, who identified plasma as the fourth state of matter; physicist Sir Oliver Lodge, who discovered radio waves while experimenting with lightning; writer and physician Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who is the creator of Sherlock Holmes; and Frederick W.H. Myers, a poet and a founder of the Society for Psychical Research. So while there have been many, many advances in the scientific study of psychic phenomena, material science still refuses to acknowledge the phenomena caused by disincarnate beings, and instead chooses to discredit any professional who dares to entertain the idea of personality survival after the change called death. I mean, I find this mind-boggling, but it's true, so I want to talk about it today. And I want you also please to notice that I mentioned the word paranormal, psi, and psychical research, psychic phenomena, and personality survival. So these terms are used, different terms are used in science and spiritualism to talk about the same phenomena, which complicates things even more. And I just want you to know for the record that the word psi, P-S-I, is a term that includes all paranormal events, including mediumship and its related phenomena. And also know that they're all used interchangeably. So let's get back to the why of material scientists have a bias towards consciousness survival. So this bias was brought to my attention by our good friend and fellow spiritualist, Dr. Alan Huguenot. Dr. Huguenot has been speaking on the topic of continuous life for several years as both a scientist and a medium, and has been an active member of psi research organizations, including the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, and the International Association of Near-Death Studies, IANS. As an applied scientist, near-death experiencer, and an evidential medium, he has a unique perspective when he states, "There is no death. There are no dead." So before we started today, I was chatting with Mary a little bit about Alan, and she said that he's the reason that she came to Celebrate Life because of his talks on near-death experience. And I want to share with you something similar with me and Alan, is that when I first started coming to Celebrate Life, I was just interested in spiritual healing. And we have a lot of fabulous speakers at Celebrate Life, but when Alan spoke, he talked about the science of it, how quantum theory supports consciousness survival, and that's a topic for another day. And he also encouraged me to take the Morris Pratt lessons. There's 30 lessons, and I was just going to take the lessons about healing. And he says, you should take them all because you never know. Well, as Mary introduced me, a lot of things I've accomplished are directly due to Alan encouraging me to take all of the Morris Pratt lessons. And Alan also introduced me to Arthur Finley's style of mediumship training. And there's just so many things he showed me. And now I'm teaching his book, which I'll talk a little bit more in a minute, his book, The New Science of Consciousness Survival, which we can get at Celebrate Life on the bookshelf there. And you can also order it on Amazon. His book I found so fascinating. It explained to me the quantum electrodynamics and mediumship and near-death experiences. And there's just so much information in his book that I taught a college course at Yavapai College in Prescott. And I have a couple of students here today that probably took that class with me. And I got to share about spiritualism with people who never really heard anything about it before. So I have lots of great things to say about Alan, but I'm also tying Alan in with the scientists and spiritualist investigators that I mentioned before, because he's one in a line of people who continue to put their reputation on the line to try and change that bias. So let me show you something here. I'm going to do a screen share. I want to draw your attention to two things that Alan has done in hopes that you can check them out yourself. Let's see if I can find the scroll. Is this it? I hope so. Let's see. Yay, there it is. This is his book, The New Science of Consciousness Survival, and you can get it on Amazon, and you can read a bit more about it right there. And I'll tell you right now, Alan does not suffer fools. So the tone of his book is like, he's so fed up with people telling him he's crazy when he's a PhD scientist, near-death experiencer, and an evidential medium trained at Arthur Findlay College. And yet his materialist scientist peers make fun of him. They ridicule him. So I highly recommend his book. And also, let's see, I have another tab here. This thing gets in the way. Okay. And here, this is another wonderful accomplishment of Alan's that is very helpful for us as he explains his journey from being a science and technology student to having a near-death experience to becoming a material scientist trained in classic Newtonian physics. Anyway, his whole story, it's about an hour long, and I highly recommend it. And I've given Mary the links to each of these, the video and the book, so that you all can follow up when you have some time. And that's what was part of my gratitude earlier today about having the Dr. Peebles information about taking 20 minutes a day to really learn about the science of spiritualism. So there's that part I wanted to share with you. Okay. So after watching his documentary and reading his book, it took me a number of years before I could actually sit down to read his book, because I was studying for my teaching credential and my ordination. And I always would look at his book on the back shelf in Celebrate Life and say, oh, one of these days I'm going to read that book. So when I finished my studies and passed my tests, I grabbed that book and I read it for 6 months, and the lines and all of that. And it just taught me so much. And that's one of our own people at Celebrate Life. So you never know where you're going to find somebody who can really give you good information about spiritualism. And we too can start giving good information about spiritualism the more we learn about it. So I do encourage you, even though it might seem difficult to grasp, that we as spiritualists might consider familiarizing ourselves with things like his book, our Spiritualist Manual, and recent scientific advancements to share the facts of consciousness survival more effectively. So material science continues to deny our collective human consciousness, our experience of consciousness, like we're all sharing today, even though material science's so-called facts have been subjected to scientific method and overturned by outstanding physicists, including James Clerk Maxwell, who formulated the classical theory of electromagnetism, which electromagnetic radiation, which basically means electricity, magnetism, and light are all part of the same spectrum. They're not something different. And then Max Planck came later, and he's a Nobel Prize winner and originator of quantum theory. And Albert Einstein, who developed the theory of relativity. And he also made important contributions to the theory of quantum physics. So these physicists debunked material science, but that's still the dogma that we are subjected to. And Ellen goes on to say, science is not an ideology. It's a method of reasoning to explore new ideas, yet materialists continue to shout down anyone who dares challenge their dogma, who dares challenge the idea that the universe is not conscious. When we die, we're gone. So Dr. Huguenot, I like to call him doctor when I talk about his knowledge and experience as a sign of respect, because he's now retired and no longer is concerned about his professional reputation, he does dare challenge materialist dogma. So our spiritualist principle number 4, we affirm that the existence and personal identity of the individual continue after the change called death. That terminology came about over 100 years ago, so it's a little bit on the Victorian side. But that speaks to consciousness survival. We believe that our consciousness survives. So based on Dr. Huguenot's personal experience and as a scientist trained in classic Newtonian physics, he takes things a step further in his fabulous book by using science to demonstrate that mediumship proves consciousness survival because, 1, we have a logical possibility, 2, we have a great deal of evidence for it, and 3, there is no evidence against it. Therefore, by scientific requirement for proof beyond a reasonable doubt, mediumship should be viewed as a scientific fact, and he's committed to establishing this once and for all. He and a number of his colleagues that are involved with the manifesto for a post-material science. There's a manifesto that scientists are starting to sign that spells out their viewpoint of consciousness, a conscious universe, in a very clear, concise fashion. So according to Dr. Huguenot, Alan, consciousness has been proven to exist by the observance of dark energy and dark matter, near-death studies, including hypothermic cardiac arrest, which is when someone has a heart attack and they cool the body down so they have time to do the surgeries and repair the heart. And then people who've had that happen, after the surgery is over and they come back, they give a full report of what happened to them as if they were on the ceiling watching what was going on. So these are the sorts of things he discusses in his book to prove once and for all that the universe is conscious. So the consequences of consciousness survival being real are slowly but surely beginning to dawn on a new generation of scientists who have not been subjected to the blinders of past prejudice. So if we can understand where this bias comes from, we can address it and then move forward. And that's my motivation for this talk today. So although we as spiritualists may not share material science's viewpoint, the fact that it is a viewpoint that does exist and is an obstacle to general acceptance of communication across the veil is not going to go away. So I want to understand it. I want to help you folks understand it, and then do what you feel called to do to help remedy the problem, just by educating yourself a little bit and sharing it with others. So evidence that demonstrates psi, there's that word psi again, psi phenomena that exists has been publicly available for years, yet very few scientists know that a scientifically valid, compelling case can be made for mediumship and its associated phenomena. We have the Society for Psychical Research, which started in 1882 and continues today. We have the J.B. Rhine Institute, Project Stargate at Stanford University, and the Institute for Noetic Sciences. So these are all organizations that continue today, I think, except for Stargate. And again, the internet is your giant Akashic record. You can find all of this stuff on the internet. So why is this? Psi evidence has been suppressed and ridiculed by a small vocal group of highly skeptical material scientists. The tendency to adopt a fixed set of beliefs is incompatible with science. However, this tendency drives materialists to defend their outmoded, inaccurate worldviews, which forces open-minded scientists to abandon interest in psi due to professional peril, meaning they could not have a job if they speak about this. It's a kind of mind-boggling. So, for example, there is a 19th century scientist that comes to mind. So the general public knows about Charles Darwin, right, and his theory of evolution. But are we equally aware of the contributions of fellow evolutionary theorist Alfred Russel Wallace? Probably not, right? Because Wallace was a colleague of Darwin, but he publicly promoted spiritualism and believed that our minds exist outside of our brain. This strained Wallace's relationship with the members of the scientific establishment and negatively affected the public perception of his work for the rest of his career. He died penniless and was only taken care of, could only manage because his fellow scientists secretly gave him money to pay his rent and buy food. I mean, this stuff continues today, but the more people talk about it, like Dean Radin and Rupert Sheldrake and Alan, Dr. Huno, little by little, the ocean liner is going to turn. The more knowledge we have as regular people, and we start to really say, no, I don't agree with material science. I think the universe is conscious. Then and only then we're going to turn this ocean liner. But we're getting there. It's the age of Aquarius after all. So another quote from Max Planck: history demonstrates that science progresses mainly by funerals and not by reasoning and logic alone. There's that same physicist who developed quantum theory. And also, a recent Gallup poll shows that 60% of the American population accepts the existence of psychic phenomena, but scientists, at least publicly, do not. Where did this scientific bias originate? So I did some research, and it turns out in the mid-1600s, René Descartes, like Cartesian logic, French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist, sought to emancipate humankind from superstition and church doctrine, and created this separation between science and religion, between God and nature. Simply put, Descartes got rid of the soul, and this concept is the foundation of material science. Descartes presumed that all matter was mechanical like a machine, including our human bodies, meaning that our minds do not have an effect on anything. It's just a chemical process. It's not consciousness. It's just a process like our stomach makes digestive fluid. And if we die, our stomach no longer makes digestive fluid. We don't digest anymore. But it's been proven over and over again to be false. But material scientists and materialists in general believe that consciousness is a product of the brain, and when the brain dies, consciousness ceases to exist. And we know this differently. That's our collective understanding of consciousness. But then there's this weird polarity or, like cognitive dissonance. No, it's not true, but we know it to be true. So 19th century intellectuals, again, going into why this bias exists, 19th century intellectuals alienated by the Christian church sought to liberate society from religious control. And materialism became a prestigious scientific view and the preferred philosophy of the intellectuals. So while Descartes' idea of an unconscious universe is one of many perspectives, his ideology became our worldview. And I hope this puts it in perspective a little bit to understand how the pendulum swings back and forth. And now I see science and spirituality coming back together, because the era of Christian religion being the foundation of our communities and our neighborhoods is just not there anymore. So there is no scientific evidence for this mechanistic way of thinking, and scientists should be able to entertain the idea of a conscious universe. But unfortunately, this is not permissible within the dogma of scientific materialism. So if scientists were allowed to explore the concept, where would consciousness reside? So Dr. Huguenot, Alan, and others postulate that consciousness resides, and this is where we get into the quantum theory part, consciousness resides in the 96% of the universe that science can't explain, the ether, proven to exist as dark matter and dark energy, also known as the electromagnetic field as defined by quantum theory. Alan goes on further to propose, as Crookes and Lodge did, the scientists I mentioned earlier, that spirit communicates with us using the same electromagnetic field that radio, television, cell phones, and the internet use to transmit and receive their signals. Think about it. It's a wave-bearing material. Why wouldn't our thoughts and spirit's thoughts be able to move through that field? So just because the receiver is not able to get the signal does not imply that the signal does not exist. And the same goes for our human transmitter receiver located inside our heads called the pineal gland. For example, if we meditate by sitting in the power and get quiet, we are tuning in to Spirit's channel. And it sounds kind of woo-woo, but there's science to back it up. I love that. And also back to Max Planck, he says, he's the physicist who developed quantum theory, mind, dark energy, is the matrix of all matter. Matter is the light energy. And he goes on to say, the universe is mental. The universe is mental is one of the 7, it's the first Hermetic axiom, the natural law. The universe is mental. Everything is vibration. So here's a physicist mentioning the Hermetic axioms, which is wisdom tradition that goes back to Egypt. So Dr. Huguenot is one of the growing number of frontier researchers that include Rupert Sheldrake, Dr. Dean Radin, and Dr. Gary Schwartz, all who risk their reputation by daring to speak the truth and add their names to that manifesto I mentioned earlier, the Manifesto for a Post-Materialist Science. You can Google that. This manifesto defines the nature of the scientific bias with wording carefully chosen to convey the evidence in an unbiased fashion, scientifically, allowing readers to draw their own conclusions. So Dr. Huguenot, Alan, is not saying anything new, but he certainly opened my eyes to what the mainstream scientists call the hard problem of trying to discern the nature of consciousness. Because in their world, if it can't be measured, then it doesn't exist. But just the fact of trying to measure waves changes its nature. And that's what makes it hard to measure psychic phenomena, spiritualist phenomena. But that's, again, a topic for another talk, a whole nother topic. And so that idea continues to be defined, it continues to define the established view through the narrow lens of material science. So in closing, I encourage us all to use the internet and educate ourselves 20 minutes a day, like Dr. Peebles suggested, in the history of spiritualism and parapsychology, taking the time to read through the evidence. And we can also support the organizations I mentioned earlier and others that are doing this compelling research by donating a bit of money for research and or some of our time that we could spend, we could be spending watching the television. And may I suggest a few concrete places to start reading? There's Alan's book. There's the Spiritualist Manual. And there's works by the early 20th century researchers specifically. There's 3 books. And if you want more information, you can email me privately. Survival of Human Personality by Myers, written in 1903. The next book is The Survival of Man by Sir Oliver Lodge, written in 1909. And 30 Years of Psychical Research, written by Nobel laureate Dr. Charles Richet in 1923. And these books are, electronic, and some of them have the capability to read to you. So you can have them read to you. You can search them for different names, and just it's one of my favorite rabbit holes. So you may be surprised to discover the great lengths the early spiritualist investigators went to in creating a very credible database for us, for future generations like us. So in my experience, the more we know the science of spiritualism, the easier it is to share modern spiritualism in a science-based manner and help unite science and spirituality once and for all. Thank you for allowing me to serve spirit today.